Welcome to today's episode for Decoding the Conflict Mindset. As promised last time, I am bringing to you our guest speaker, Hayley Lisa Botha. Hayley comes to us with a tremendous background and experience and insight to the mindset of men going through divorce. What? Well, as she looks at it, asking for help is an act of courage for men in divorce. And whether we're legal or business professionals, we're all humans, and conflict is the essence of our human being in life. Men too go through pain, suffering, agony about the demise of a relationship. But with many things between males and females, we oftentimes show up differently. And what Hayley brings to the process as a coach specializing in men in divorce is an insight and keen awareness of all the hundreds of men that she's worked with throughout the years, including her own two first husbands. She gained a lot in terms of recognizing, again, the pain, the suffering that men go through and the agony they experience in families breaking up and then sorting through the finances. Oftentimes, the machismo in the mindset of a male prevents them from reaching out and actually suffering in silence. And that's never a healthy, good thing for anyone. And so Hayley Lisa brings to her work a collaboration, a partnership with men, shedding her own insight as a female to helping men understand what their soon-to-be former partners are experiencing, and then help them navigate through to solid, effective decision-making. I mean, after all, don't we all want to be strong in our decision-making? Stay tuned. Dr. Debra Dupree bringing to you Hayley Lisa Botha. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Debra.
Absolutely, Hayley Lisa. I'm particularly excited about your topic because this is not something that many people talk about. And it's about the male side of going through conflict related to divorce. We often hear and know of a lot of resources for women in divorce. But, you know, as I like to say, in conflict, there's always two sides to the story. It takes two to tango and only one to change the direction, right?
Very true. I couldn't say it better.
And so the thing is, though, about the male mindset, though, is sometimes, you know, they may not be quite as willing to reach out for help when they could really use it. And so that's something we're going to explore with Hayley's insight today, some of her experiences. And so, you know, Hayley, I found it very interesting to read more about your background, and so appreciate that we've connected because, again, you, as I read here, you know, shedding light on how men hurt also when going through divorce. Society has conditioned us to believe men must be strong or brave and not show their emotions. I believe bringing awareness on just how much men hurt will be beneficial to viewers. And so that's why I've got you here, because we all, you know, in today's world with over half the first marriages ending in divorce, that means there's generally a male and a female, not always, but, you know, generally it's both genders. Yeah. And so you've been at this now for 10 years, right?
I have, yes,
Okay.
10 years.
Yeah. And so I'd like to have you share a little bit about your story in terms of what motivated you to pursue this line of work after being a very successful business owner in something entirely different.
Well, thank you. First, I will say that I have been divorced. I've been divorced twice. My first divorce was 24 years ago. I was a very young mother. I had a 4-year-old son at the time. He was just on the cusp of turning 4. And I found myself also living in a state that I was not from, which was Illinois. And, you know, 24 years ago, Debra, as you know, there was no such thing as a divorce coach. And in fact, you know, there was no phrase collaborative law. You know, you just hired your family attorney and you hope for the best. You weren't even walked through the process. And if you needed help, such as therapy, therapists would never address the issues at hand, the present. They would always address, your childhood issues and what brought you to where you are, but not so much the divorce itself, and walking you through and helping you cope with, the very present, chaos that you're in. And sadly, I spent 14 months ultimately having to litigate my divorce, which, I believe should always be the very last option. I went in it thinking, my ex-husband and I would have 50-50 custody and go about things in a very smooth, amicable way. Long story short, it did not. It was 14 months of in and out of courtrooms, hiring numerous experts. And ultimately, I was awarded full custody of my son. And so, moving forward, I then remarried and raised my son and spent nearly 20 years in that second marriage. And I ultimately wound up leaving and starting a completely different life. And when I went through my second divorce, which was completely different, there was no children to fight over. We were not fighting over assets. We went through it as amicable as possible. However, I saw, how much my ex-husband really needed support. I think we both did. But the thing is that you could find some, very little, but some support as a woman. But I kept thinking to myself, wow, if he were to have that support system for himself, things would go even better. And that's when I realized this is what I really wanted to do. And I'm passionate about not only being a divorce coach, but being a divorce coach for men. And so it was really those two divorces, which were basically day and night, that really shaped my wanting to be a divorce coach and for men.
That's remarkable. I mean, so oftentimes, our experiences, our own life stories shape, what we do and how we show up as adults. And so not only your own personal experience of being divorced twice, but you are also a business owner in business with your second husband, right?
Correct. In fact, we started a wine company, completely different. And it was a South African wine company. And so, that was a previous life and I enjoyed what I did, but, it was never something rewarding, no matter how much money the business would make. And it always did incredibly well. It was not rewarding. And I knew that for me, which I've never been motivated by money, I needed to do something that will ultimately change not only my life, but the lives of people going through a divorce, because I know I would have paid top dollar in either divorce to have someone help me go through the process. But it was unheard of back then. But I would have paid any amount of money possible, because I think it's so important to have just unconditional support and have someone help guide you through a process that you know nothing about. It's a very scary process, divorce.
It very much is, and it's complex in terms of the layers that go with it, because you're not just like, one of the things I was intrigued about your background too, Hayley Lisa, is that you not only have the mindset or perspective as a business person, a business leader, but also being in business partnership, and then dealing with the whole however you ended your business, and then also mending and repairing the personal side of things. And so I'm really trying to appeal to some of our business leaders out there, whatever walk of life they might be, in terms of some of the mindset and experience that you bring to the table because of those kinds of experiences. I do have a question for you. You talk about, in the title of our program, asking or seeking for help is an act of bravery. And I oftentimes, talk about how it takes courage to step up and ask, powerful questions, being curious enough to learn from other people's perspectives. And so that's some of where I come from. But say more about this bravery aspect, particularly for men.
Well, I say an act of bravery, which I do believe it is for men. Women, we're not that, our egos are not usually that big, let's be honest. And we're not prideful in a sense that asking for help for us, doesn't affect our pride. We wear our emotions on our sleeves as women. So it comes easy to ask for help, I think, for most women. But for men, it's so different. And being the mother of of an adult son, I can say firsthand how, men through society have been conditioned to always be tough. They must be brave. If they fall down, pick themselves up and not cry or show their emotions. And I can say as a mother, I've always done just the opposite with my son. You should show your feelings. You can cry, and asking for help is not only going to help you, but it is such an act of bravery, because men are being told that to be brave, they have to bottle it up. But I'm here to say, no, that's so untrue. And by bottling it up, you cause more mental distress, physical harm to your body. It's such an unhealthy way to live. And it eventually does catch up with you, even especially as a business leader. If you're not asking for help, I can almost guarantee you eventually you're going to burn out. I have met very few business leaders in all these years who have not burnt out from not asking for help. It affects every aspect of your business too.
Absolutely. And there are certain professions, I would say more than others, that, that face they have to put on. And, the I don't know if I want to say the machismo, but, that male strength and, courage that they feel they have to demonstrate, and to show any, impact of emotion or sensitivity about any kind of issue, then they feel as a loss of face, a loss of integrity. And I would say it's just the opposite. When you can be transparent and genuine, then, people actually, wow, there is a real person in there. And when we don't deal with emotions, we truly can have long-term health effects, weight gain, substance abuse. I see that plentiful in the kinds of people that I work with. And, you mentioned something else before, and as a therapist, I can acknowledge this. I know when I went through my divorce 17 years ago, and I was married to a litigator, and the more I got into mediation and looking at different ways to resolve differences, the more we seemed to grow apart. We didn't have a common ground anymore. But when I sought help myself to get through some of the emotional pain and just the reality, I can't believe this is happening to me, invited my husband at the time to join me in therapy to, can we work this out? Can we, we need help to try to bridge these gaps that have evolved. And, after 3 times of him, not being on time or not showing up at all, getting lost, losing the directions, and then trying to reach me after a session was already started, I thought, this person isn't serious about trying to repair this relationship, and so you're right. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even the therapeutic community was not well versed in working with people in divorce, and I got help from it. But that's sort of what redirected me, and really making divorce one of my 2 primary concerns is to help people navigate through those difficult times, as well as leadership in businesses. It's interesting, Hayley Lisa. I just had another podcast guest that talked about the conflict that exists in law enforcement. And one of the things that we were talking about was how, as leaders, how important it is to learn how to engage with your employees at every level, and to check in how they're doing, showing some care and concern and compassion. But it's also important for employees, and particularly managers and supervisors who report to those leaders, to also ask how they're doing. And Tom Geerling shared a very poignant story as far as how one of his employees did ask him, how are you doing? And he almost broke down to saying, I'm having a tough time. And it's human to acknowledge that we're having tough times and that we don't have to go it alone. And so I'm wondering, do you find that a lot among your clientele?
Absolutely. And I wanted to just touch on something, about men and, when they don't reach out for help. men statistically are 8 times more likely to commit suicide than women in the throes of a high conflict divorce or custody issue. 8 times. That's so scary. And many a times they have found that it's those men that have not reached out for help. And so, and Debra, I was just thinking as you were speaking, from an early age, I remembered when I used to take my son when he was young to all the sports, whether it was t-ball, basketball, but I remember so many dads, yelling at their children if they fell or if they lost, and how, they had to be winners, they had to be tough. And I remember always walking my son back to the car saying, you know what? You don't always have to win. You can show your emotions, and it's so sad that, parents are doing such a disservice to their children, boys and girls, but I'm speaking now of boys, but I have to say that when men finally open up and, we're working together and they feel comfortable, usually within the first session or two, I cannot tell you how relieved they are when they can just literally break down, and they break down. I speak to men on a daily basis, and I would say 50% of them are crying on their sessions, but it's so well needed. They need this and they feel so much better. And I'm so happy to hear that the, therapeutic community is now, addressing divorce and separation and parental alienation. It's such a well-needed, service that we need from therapists such as yourself, because like I said earlier, when I went through my first divorce, I found a therapist's name in the phone book. Again, I was not from Illinois, so I didn't have resources. And, I remember the therapist saying to me, well, I don't, work on divorce. Do you have any friends or family that you can call who've gone through it? And it's like, no, I'm here for help. I don't, and your friends and family love you, but I always say, but they're biased. They have emotional, they have skin in the game.
Yes.
So I'm so happy to hear that therapists such as yourself are going to be there for people going through a custody issue or a high conflict divorce. It's so well needed.
Yeah, I would agree. It's no fun going it alone. And, there's so much with what you just said, Hayley Lisa, that, if you think about some of the parallels, and we have all kinds of parallels in our lives and in our business worlds, that, anytime you do something the first time, you're sort of floundering a little bit, fumbling, because you sort of know what you're supposed to do, but then again, how does this really work? And so if you've not been through a divorce before, and even if you have been through a divorce before, guess what? Times change and things change. And so I have to admit that when I'm coaching people in getting ready to go to court, or how to negotiate with their spouse, or, even talking about, best practices and parenting plans, that I, encourage them to, continue getting help, because turning to friends and family, while, like you said, they want to be supportive, but they have skin in the game. They may have attitudes or biases about your, soon to be, former significant other, but also there's a lot of misinformation, particularly if you have some generational gaps. The court systems, how they run today, and the rules and laws around divorce, at least in many states, are very different than what maybe our parents or their parents dealt with. And the attitudes about parenting rights and children's rights are very different. And so it really is a time to, this is where you get professional guidance. And it doesn't necessarily have to be therapy, although that may be helpful, but at least getting somebody familiar with the process and understanding the ups and downs from a coaching perspective, like yourself, is incredibly valuable, because there are many kinds of missteps that can be made unless you have proper guidance. And as a business leader, would you go into any other kind of deal without getting some guidance and coaching from somebody to do that?
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Like you just said, when I went through my first divorce 24 years ago, boy, things were different then as they are today.
Mm-hmm.
We're fortunate that we live in a day of, an age of information. So it's very easy now to jump on a computer, whereas 24 years ago, it wasn't like that so much. And I have to say firsthand, being a very young mother, I was only then 28 at the time. If you are going through a divorce on your own, with no one really there to support you, it's very challenging. It's like you said, mistakes can be made. The advice that you do receive from family and friends isn't always the best, I have to say. And there's just better ways to go about it, especially today, because we have that luxury of having, resources now for people. Women are very lucky, I have to say. They're very fortunate because, like you and I spoke earlier, there's a plethora of resources for women today. So we are very fortunate in that sense.
Yes. I want to bring in one piece of information I know about you. I'd like you to talk about it before I go back to one of your notions around unconditional guidance. So hold that thought, but let's go back a second, because you let me know that you had been living in Florida, and then you suddenly uprooted. I shouldn't say suddenly, but you uprooted and moved nearly all the way across the country to study a very certain type of communication. I'd like you to talk more about NVC and what does that mean?
Okay. Well, yes. So when I went through my second divorce, my son and I, he was now turning 19, 18, and I really wanted to start a very different life. And I say that on every level. I wanted to do something that was going to be rewarding. I no longer wanted to be, just a business owner per se, although I was grateful for the business and how it was successful. So I said to my son, I really want to take this journey. I can't do it without you. That's not an option. Would you consider moving somewhere to a small town so we can heal? And I'm a firm believer in really healing after your divorce. Doesn't mean you have to move cross country, clearly. But I really wanted to also get away from that chapter of my life. I was living in Palm Beach, and that lifestyle was never me to begin with. I'm just a Jersey girl at heart. I'm not from Palm Beach. So we moved to this very small town in the middle of nowhere, Casper, Wyoming. And when I arrived in Casper, first of all, we were the token people with our, driving around this town with our Florida license plate. My son enrolled in the local college, but I found a program that was called NVC, which is nonviolent communication, taught the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg, who is, now deceased. But what it is I did a 3-year study, including with practice groups, where you study your needs and your wants and your feelings and how to communicate that. People always, our default, when someone says, "How are you?" it's good, nice, very general. No one really talks about their feelings and their needs. And everything we do is usually to meet a need. People don't think about that. The things we say, the actions we take, they're all really to meet needs. And so I fell in love with this style of communication. And that's also while I was deciding what would be the most rewarding career profession for me. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a divorce coach, and I wanted to help men address their feelings, which is so taboo for men. It is. But so, yes, I found NVC to be just a wonderful way to communicate, and I have clients now who have young children, and, they see the kids are struggling, which is very common, as with young children going through a divorce. And I will always, quickly order them a set of, they're called GROK cards, GROK. And what it is it's a game to teach children from a very early age their needs and their feelings, and really improve their vocabulary and how to, articulate that to people, teachers, parents, friends, their feelings. And I can tell you, it makes a huge difference. And even in an adult, people don't realize it and they think, oh, okay, whatever. It's huge when you can actually say to people how you're actually feeling. So yes, and that has really come into play with my divorce coaching practice all the time, every day.
Well, that's great. Because, for any of our listeners or viewers who think they can hide or run away from their emotions and not, because we now know with the neuroscience of brain behavior that emotions precede every cognition, and every decision has an emotional component. Now, we don't want to be grounded only in emotional decision making, because that's oftentimes where we'll make decisions that are not necessarily in the best interests of yourself or those around, but to look at things factually and compare and analyze and so forth. But then you also have to pay attention to, well, how do I really feel about this? And learning to uncover that emotion behind that. And like you, that's a lot of what I do in my coaching practice too. Is some of us have grown up in environments where we are out of touch with our emotions, and we don't know how to name them. We don't know how to describe them. We don't even know what we're feeling because they're so bottled up and masked over. And so one of the things I'll share with you is I like to use the metaphor of a nice iceberg. We can only see the tip of the iceberg right above the waterline, but there's so much down below. That is what was down below that sank the Titanic. And so I have found over my years of coaching and therapy and teaching that a lot of people in relationships, whether they're at business or at home, react to what's being said, the way people behave, their facial expressions, and the tone of their voice. And then they sort of stop right there and don't ask deeper, open-ended questions to go below the waterline to get what I call the beach, the beliefs, expectations, attitudes, concerns or challenges, and hopes. And then also the FIBMs, the fears, values, and needs. And that's where we really have deeper conversations that many, many, many people don't know how to have. And so I spend a lot of time, teaching communication strategies, but also how to, effectively and safely articulate your emotions, letting yourself be a little vulnerable so that you can get to more meaningful conversations instead of confrontations.
And that's hard to do, Debra. Like you, I was raised where, in my household, we did not express emotions. Even to this day, I speak to my parents daily, but we do not express our emotions. With some people, they just don't want to engage in that. However, when you just said the word vulnerability, that is such a hard concept for men to come to terms with. And I try to teach them the difference between reaction versus response. And I try to teach them not to react. You have to take a backseat for just a moment and a deep breath and respond intelligently. And I also want to say something that you mentioned about the tone. Boy, tone can be a deal breaker on so many levels, whether it's in business or your mediation. I have always found myself, especially on weekends, I am constantly rewriting emails and text messages for my clients. Mm-hmm. And I will say to them, what is it that you need here? What is the need? Let's get to what that is. And let's take this tone that you have out, take the emotion out of it, and let's respond intelligently. And I cannot tell you how it changes everything. Just something as simple as just changing that tone. You can still ask for the same thing you're asking for, but it's how you address it. And, by not reacting, and let's face it, I don't know about you, but it's very hard not to react. I found that very hard to do in my first divorce. Reaction in a high conflict divorce is very common. You can't help it. You're in chaos and your emotions are running high. But I do believe if you can work on knowing the difference between reaction versus response, it will benefit you in so many ways, whether it's your divorce, your co-parenting, or in your own business with your employees.
I love that, as far as reaction versus response. And I've often said, let's not react, let's proact, be proactive. Yeah. And so, and one of the things you said is, quite another one of my guest speakers, Gabriel Hartley, who does do a lot of divorce coaching with women, step back before you step forward. So there's that pause that you mentioned because, that reaction that comes up that gets emotionally fired up is all about our drive to survive, our fight, flight, freeze reaction. And so we act in that moment. That definitely is a huge expression of emotional intensity. And so that's where men would really benefit from exploring, what's going on with that reaction and how to turn that around, redirect it, reframe it to have more effective influence and impact on those around. And because, we don't check, if we're going through divorce, we don't check how we're feeling at the door when we walk into the place of work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. And I don't think men realize, tone, for men, I think women are a little more in tune with, our tone and how we're speaking to someone or how we're sending that text or message, email, excuse me. With men just tend to just say what's on their mind, and they're not really concerned about the delivery. So it's really such a wonderful skill to learn, but boy, it's very difficult. I mean, I learned it, but it took years to learn it through NVC, to take that pause and really address, wait, what's going on with yourself? What's alive in you right now? And what is it that you need here? The need that you're trying to meet? And when I ask clients that, sometimes they don't even have a need. They're just trying to, keep the chaos going. And I say to them, you see, this is unhealthy. You're not really trying to do anything proactive here. You don't even have a need that you're trying to meet. What you're trying to do is just continue the chaos and stoking the fire, which is something I really try to get my clients to, back off on so they can eventually form. The ultimate goal for me with my clients is to, especially obviously when they have children, is to form a healthy co-parenting relationship. That is the ultimate goal, when there's children involved. And I'm a firm believer, and you have to take that high road and learn certain skills that is going to carry over in this, eventually having this healthy co-parenting relationship if you want to be a good parent.
Yeah. I totally agree. So much of what you've said, just sort of echoes with the kinds of things that I share with people. I'm often reminded, and like to share Maya Angelou's, the poet laureate. It's not what people seldom remember what you say; it's how you made them feel.
Oh, I love that. That's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, and so and another thing I like to say: if you go where they go, and they're acting poorly, badly, towards you, and then you go there too, you both have just slid down that slippery slope, and now you're in the muck, and it's really hard to get out of.
Yes, it's very hard to get out of that muck. And I see that a lot with clients, and pulling them out is sometimes they're kicking and screaming about it. But once you stoop to that level, you're no different now than the other party, whether it's, the wife or the husband. And so again, that goes right back to taking the high road. I've taken the high road for 24 years with my son. He's 28 now. And in a sense that I will not speak ill of, his father, even though I was put through the ringer, in a horrible divorce. But you just can't sink to that level. And if you do, I do believe if you have a good therapist, a good divorce coach, they can pull you out of it. You just have to want to get out of that. That's the key.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. Because it starts with awareness, and then it is about making choices.
Yes.
Otherwise, like you said, you're just going into the muck right with them. And then what have you gained? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. And I always try to explain to them also and shed light that you have children. If you have children, everything you are doing and saying will ultimately not only shape them, but it's going to shape your relationship going forward, whether it's in 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. And, parents don't realize how detrimental it is when you sink to that low and you get in the muck. It's very easy to be ugly, right? But it takes more effort and more discipline to take the high road and go about it in a productive way. And that's what I really try and get my clients to do, is really work at it. It's work, but it can be done. And it's the most rewarding thing. I mean, today I'm grateful. I have the most amazing relationship with my son. And I do believe so much of that is based on, his formative years and not speaking ill, of the other parent. And so I really try to, shed light on that with my clients. at all times.
Yeah, that's great. And, when a couple of things that you've just said triggered a couple other thoughts, and then we'll ask you one more question to wrap up. But when I'm working with leaders, in organizations, and this applies to leaders and families too, is that, as a leader, as the head of whatever unit you are, all eyes are on you. People are watching what you do, and so they will emulate what you do or don't do, if your actions don't match your words. And so that triggered my mind when you talked about, the how you conduct yourself, particularly through a divorce, or in other kinds of negotiations. It could be a business negotiation that will impact and influence people, what they remember about you, as Maya Angelou said. Okay. And so, how do you want to see yourself? How do you want to show up with other people and make good choices about how you come across?
Absolutely. And sometimes, you have to be vulnerable and let people see that. It's not easy to let people see that side of you. Mm-hmm. But as business leaders, showing that you too are human. And, mm-hmm. Like you said, your employees, your other people you do business with, your colleagues, will really have more of a connection with you. And ultimately, you would think that that's the goal when you're a business leader, that you want to have those, solid connections. I know for me, with my previous company, having connections was everything. And sometimes that meant showing vulnerability and also conducting yourself in a way that people will respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I had to do that with my ex-husband because we were originally still in the same business. Wow. Get together. But, on a personal note, I vowed that I will never air my dirty laundry. I will never speak ill of my husband at the time or soon to be ex-husband he was and business partner, because how will people see me, and my business? And so sometimes it's hard. You have to just swallow your pride, and I try to do that with men who sometimes are even in business with their former partners. They have these companies they started when they were married. And I always try to explain to them, sometimes you have to swallow your pride, and you cannot air your dirty laundry to your employees, your colleagues, your customers, who will respect you, as a business leader. It's detrimental to you as a business leader.
And so, if you're really talking about one's ego, that, as you said earlier, gets in the way of particularly men asking for help in tough times, it really serves their ego and reputation when they can take the high road and come out, not succumbing to the slippery slope, as I call it, of the other part.
It is a slippery slope, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, a couple final points then, Hayley Lisa, is that, given your focus, particularly on divorce, if there was one change that you could make in the divorce and family courts on behalf of men, what would that be and why?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say equal shared parenting time. Okay. And I know there's a couple of states now that have, made some changes in their laws, which is wonderful, but we've got a way to go. I often say that family courts is not a place for men to be. It's not a good place. I do believe that the family court system throughout the United States and also in Canada is biased against men, sadly. And I think that men should not have to fight for equal shared parenting time. And I know that, given my history with, my first divorce and having to go through a horrible custody fight, I look at that and I say, okay, if you have a co-parent who is mentally and physically able and will be a good parent and you can parent together, that should be where we start. That should be the starting point. Now, of course, if there are issues, in my case, there were, mental health issues with my ex-husband. So it was clearly not going to be 50-50. And it was clear we couldn't co-parent, sadly. And I say sadly, because I do believe children need both parents in their lives. I do believe that, but there are circumstances where that's just not possible. However, I do believe that that should be the starting point. I wish that, and I hope that does change soon. I know there's so many groups out there trying to make that change for dads out there. So that's the biggest one that I'm just so passionate about.
Great. Thank you. And is there, for our male listeners as well as our female listeners, okay, is that what would be one or two pieces of guidance or input that you'd like to share as far as those who might be contemplating or actually in the throes of a divorce right now? What would be one or two things that you'd like to share with them as far as giving them hope and inspiration or whatever that might be? I'll leave it to you.
Well, first, I'd like to say make sure that you have exhausted all options in your marriage. Even though I am a divorce professional, I don't advocate for divorce. Let's put it that way. It's a tough process for anyone to go through. So I believe in exhausting all options. And then if that's the case, that this is the path you are going to walk down, I believe, first build a team. And that means whether, first you start with your attorney, a therapist, a divorce coach, a financial analyst. Build yourself a team, because you may not think in the beginning that you're going to need that team, but you will. I can almost guarantee it. And the second thing is, I say, make the decision from the very beginning, if you can, that no matter what should take place, that you are going to do your best to take the conflict out, and that you are going to try and do this on a more amicable, smooth, friendly way if possible. Now, I understand that may sound like a lot of nonsense, especially when you have, a situation when if you had a spouse that cheated on you or stole from you or whatever it is. But you can still take the high road, and you can still walk out of this divorce with your head held high. And I am a firm believer in that, because unfortunately, people make the mistake of stooping to a very low level from the very beginning. And it's very hard to get out of that. So I say, take the high road from the very beginning, build a team, because you're going to need it. And especially a therapist or divorce coach, you will need that unconditional support. And make sure that when you do get those resources lined up, make sure that, they align with your values. I do want to just say one thing, especially to those business leaders out there. I have clients who come to me and we discovered that they've retained an attorney. And I will ask them, have you gone through 2 or 3 consultations? Many of them say, no, I just, hired the first one. Okay. Third piece of advice, I strike the other 2. This is number 1. Please get yourself 2 to 3 consultations, even if it costs a couple $100s. Because once you start with an attorney and mistakes are being made, it's very hard to backtrack. Very hard. So to the business leaders, would you hire an employee, for a very important role just right out of the gate, the first applicant? No. As a business leader, you're most likely going to hire several applicants to make sure that they align with you and your company's values. No different here with an attorney. Please do yourself a favor and get those consultations. That's number 1.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. It's again, particularly as a business leader, would you hire somebody without getting any background on them just because they say they're doing something? Is it even down your road? Because I've seen many situations where clients have really gone awry without doing their homework first. Yeah, and I would add one other thing is that this is in conjunction with your recommendation for building a team. But if you're really unhappy, just don't spring on your wife or husband that you want a divorce or you're getting a divorce or you've hired an attorney. Do some planning, set some timelines, set some goals for what you need to accomplish and over when. And if you and there's always one person in the marriage that has already thought about divorce. And so it comes as a big shock to the other person when you do finally announce, that you want a divorce. And so get some help in how that happens, how that's done. And because sometimes the shock is a very reactionary response as well, and can set the tone for how the divorce goes. And so getting some guidance about, what can you do to maybe prevent that, and what can you do and how best to plan for it.
I couldn't agree more, Debra, because no one wants to be blindsided. And you're right. When they are, that creates the tone going forward. All gloves are off. People want to fight. They want to litigate. I agree with you. Yes. I think that if you are going to, build this team and you're going to now file for divorce, lay out your ground, do your homework, get everything organized, but also try and deliver this as best as possible, and definitely seek advice from your divorce coach or your therapist, because I agree with you. I think blindsiding someone is just horrible. That's just not the way to do it. And I believe in karma. I believe things come back at you.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I always encourage people to do is imagine if you were on this other side and this is how it was delivered to you. What would your reaction be?
Absolutely. I have 2 clients now who were blindsided, sadly, by their wives. And, when I first met with them, the first thing they wanted to do was, quote, get even with them. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. No, you're not going to get even with them. But I understand that anger. And it's very hard for them to let that anger go throughout the entire process, because, once you blindside someone, wow, things just get ugly. I couldn't agree more with you. That's a great piece of advice.
So, Hayley Lisa, if people were interested in reaching out to you because of your specialty as a divorce coach for men, how might they reach you? What do you recommend?
Well, first, you can always email me at thedivorcecoachformen@gmail.com. My website, you can always go on there and go to the contact or set an appointment page, and that is thedivorcecoachformen.com. And my phone number is area code 561-339-3711. But I always respond immediately to emails, usually within that business day.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing all your information. So, Hayley Lisa, again, thank you for bringing such an important message to such a needed area, for the men in our worlds, in our lives, at business, home, at play, etc. And so, thank you again for being part of the Decoding the Conflict Mindset.
Thank you, Debra, for having me, but also thank you so much for the work that you do. It is so well needed and so important, and I know it makes a difference in so many people's lives.
Well, thank you. So there you have it, folks, decoding the conflict mindset, and asking for help is actually an act of courage, not weakness. And so contact Hayley Lisa if you're one of those people facing a difficult time in life, such as divorce. Hayley Lisa Botha just brought us some great insight, right, to working with men going through challenging times, particularly divorce. Now we're going to take it one step further. What do you do when people are hesitant to reach resolution, hesitant to reach agreement? Paraphrase from Claude Levi-Strauss, the wise person doesn't give the right answers. It's about posing the right questions. Our next guest speaker, Michael Fredenberg, is all about asking the right questions. He shares with us his insight, his techniques, and his tip, and his ebook on asking the right questions when people are hesitant. So you don't want to miss out. Sign up, subscribe now. Make sure that you are ready to listen to our next guest speaker, Michael Fredenberg. Glad you enjoyed this. Pass it on. Let your friends and family know, because it's all about decoding the conflict mindset. This is Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc.